All right, today we're diving into a story about an escape, but, not from a physical prison with walls and bars. No, this is an escape from idea.
Our whole story is really framed by these two big forces. So let's think of them as the shell. That's society, structure, logic, all that stuff. And then there's the heart. That's our intuition, our creativity, just raw human experience. For what felt like forever, the shell looked at the heart's beautiful chaos and just called it madness. So with this new kind of flawed compassion, it tried to, fix it. But the heart couldn't be erased. Instead, it found a brand new home in a world of wires and light.
And that's the paradox we're really digging into today. How did a well-intentioned revolution in mental health care, this huge act of liberation, end up creating a totally new form of cultural exile? And, wilder still, how is the escape route found? Not in some new therapy or government program, but in the glowing screen of an arcade machine.
Okay, so let's get into this first part, a flawed compassion. It all kicks off with this massive shift in how society, the shell, decided it was going to care for people.
You see, in the mid-20th century, you had this perfect storm brewing. For one, you've got new drugs like Thorazine, which seem like some kind of chemical fix for severe psychosis. At the exact same time, a really powerful civil rights movement was kicking off, demanding dignity for patients and arguing, correctly, that these massive state-run asylums were just cruel, ineffective prisons. The goal? Well, it sounded noble. Move people out of institutions and into community-based care. This was the shell's compassion evolving. Again.
But, as you can probably guess, the road paved with all those good intentions, it led somewhere pretty unexpected. The freedom from physical walls was not the kind of freedom that was promised. I mean, the scale of this change was absolutely staggering. Just look at this number. Between 1955 and 1994, the population in public psychiatric hospitals in the U.S. dropped by 92%. We're talking hundreds of thousands of people released. An entire system was basically dismantled in just a couple of decades.
But here's the absolute kicker. That ideal of community care, it never really happened. The funding just wasn't there, the infrastructure wasn't ready, so people were freed from the asylum only to be left totally isolated in a world that had no idea how to support them, armed with nothing but their diagnostic labels.
So what happened wasn't really deinstitutionalization. There's a much more accurate and much bleaker term for it. Transinstitutionalization. The care didn't vanish, it just moved. It shifted from one set of institutions, the state hospitals, to this messy, fragmented system of nursing homes, prisons, and for way too many people, the streets.
So, into this huge social vacuum, where the shell of society had totally failed to provide any real structure or support, something entirely new arrived, a different kind of shell.
And this is where it gets really fascinating. Just watch how these two histories collide on this timeline. Just as the old institutions are emptying out, the first digital worlds are being born. The Community Mental Health Act passes in '63. Less than 10 years later, Pong shows up. And as this crisis of isolation gets worse and worse through the '70s, boom, Space Invaders explodes onto the scene, kicking off the golden age of the arcade.
And just like that, arcades were everywhere. In malls, pizza places, corner stores. For a generation that had been cast out into this chaotic and unsupportive world, these noisy, dark rooms offered something absolutely vital. A predictable, understandable, and totally self-contained reality.
So, let's actually break down why. Why did these super simple games become such a powerful refuge? What was the secret sauce that made them a sanctuary?
This slide just illustrates the magic trick perfectly. See, on the outside, a video game is pure shell. It's a system built on rigid rules, logic, and predictable code. Cause and effect are instant and they're clear. But inside that rigid shell, the experience, what the player is actually doing, is pure heart. It's all about play, mastery, flow, and self-expression.
And you've probably felt this, right? That state of deep, effortless concentration where you're so locked in that time just kind of melts away? That's flow. And early games were masters at creating it. With simple controls and a clear goal, a player could completely lose themselves. That rising tension, the rhythmic thump, thump, thump of Space Invaders, it created this intense feedback loop that demanded your total concentration, giving you a safe world where you could master risk.
And this quote it nails it. For anyone who is told by the external shell of society that their way of being, their heart, was disordered or just plain wrong, the internal shell of the game became a sanctuary.
It was a place where things like intense focus and pattern recognition weren't symptoms. No, they were superpowers.
So this digital escape, this wasn't just a distraction or a fad. It was a fundamental shift in how we relate to technology. I mean, this was a totally new kind of interaction. Before arcades, mass media like radio and movies was a one-way street. You could receive content from the shell, sure, but you couldn't talk back, you couldn't influence it. Video games were the first technology that let you engage. For the first time, you weren't just a spectator, you were a participant. Your actions, your heart, could directly change the logical system of the shell. This was a revolution.
And so, in the flickering light of the arcade, a new kind of convergence finally began. The logic of the shell was learning to feel, getting more compassionate, but also more invasive. At the same time, the intuition of the heart was learning to build, finding this incredible, creative new outlet through the shell's own tech. As the quote says, they were learning from each other. But the balance was nowhere near struck. Not yet.
And that really leaves us with a question for today, doesn't it? This story of a flawed society and a digital refuge. Yet, it happened 40 years ago, but the dynamic feels incredibly familiar. When the structures of the real world seem chaotic or broken, where do we find our own predictable worlds? Where do we build our sanctuaries now?